Breaking today, Meghan Markle just couldn't deal with Catherine, the Princess of Wales, completing one of the most amazing feats for a royal who is recovering from cancer in total privacy, because she didn't shout about this Three Peaks mission at all until she had actually achieved it.
They have a horrible reputation for their lack of work ethic, for their lack of ability to collaborate with genuinely talented people that know what the hell they're doing.
And this is the reason, according to that source, why Markle will always try and dent anything Catherine, the Princess of Wales, does. The problem is, Catherine is liked, and what you see is genuine. You can really see a genuine person there.
Harry and Meghan have an inflated sense of their own importance, and when they aren't twerking on Instagram, they behave as though they're heads of state.
What is that noise? What is it? Can you hear that? Oh, it's the sound of the world's tiniest violin playing for the Duke of Tantrums. Prince Harry has thrown the toys out of the cot again.
Meghan Markle thought she would mince into the royal family and she'd be Queen Bee, and that girl from a middle-class background blew her out of the damn water. And nobody's ever said that because it would be so upsetting. Meghan Markle met a match and Iron Kate blew her out of the water, and she'll never, ever be able to handle it.
Mic drop.
Something just snapped, and not quietly, not politely, but in that loud, uncomfortable way that forces everyone watching to confront what they've been trying to ignore. Because when one person walks into the room with something real, something unpolished, unannounced, and completely unperformed, it doesn't just shine, it exposes. It exposes the cracks, the rehearsals, the carefully staged illusions that suddenly don't hold up under that kind of light. And if you felt that shift, if something in your gut tightened like you were watching a truth unfold in real time, then you already know this wasn't just another royal headline. This was a moment that split perception wide open. And the people who've been relying on performance, they felt it deeply.
You have the shallow vein and vapid Meghan Markle, who doesn't really accomplish anything, is contrived as heck, and desperately seems to be trying to compete without understanding that she needs to come from a place of authenticity. And Meghan has never been really authentic in her life.
Because while everyone else was busy planning optics, building anticipation, and lining up cameras, Catherine did something almost dangerous in today's world. She did something real without telling anyone. No buildup, no announcement, no carefully timed teaser, just action. Quiet, relentless action. The kind that doesn't ask for attention because it doesn't need it. Britain's National Three Peaks Challenge, nearly 23 miles of brutal elevation. 3 countries, 24 hours. This isn't symbolic. This is physical, punishing, undeniable effort. And she didn't package it. She lived it. That alone would have been enough to shake the narrative. But it didn't stop there.
Tale of 2 princesses, wasn't it? One real, one fake, because what Catherine has achieved here is so significant. But don't you think it's about the way that she did it? It proves you can do something like this in total privacy. It can be for yourself, but then, Brittany, as a member of the royal family, you can also use it to do something good, to help others, to raise awareness, to raise money, all of that.
Because this wasn't just about a climb, it was about intent. And intent is where everything begins to unravel. She wasn't selling anything. She wasn't aligning herself with a brand. She wasn't attaching her name to something vague and convenient. She chose the Royal Marsden Cancer Charity, the very institution that stood between her and something far darker. That detail, that one detail, changes everything. Because now it's not performance, it's gratitude. It's personal. And when something is personal, you can't fake it convincingly for long. People feel the difference. They always do. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Because just as that authenticity started dominating the conversation, just as the headlines began to breathe her story, instead of just reporting it, something else appeared. Not organically, not quietly, but suddenly, strategically, almost urgently.
I really wanted to use this opportunity as my way of contributing to all the wonderful work that's going on, and in particular to support the Royal Marsden Cancer Charity, an organisation very dear to me.
Within days, a product launch, a brand reveal, as ever, dropped directly into a news cycle that wasn't asking for it. Now, coincidence exists. Of course it does. But timing has a pattern. And patterns don't lie. Because this isn't the first time something like this has happened. It's just the first time it's been this obvious. The contrast wasn't subtle anymore, it was jarring. One story built on action quietly revealed. The other introduced with intention, placement, and strategy. And suddenly, the audience wasn't just watching, they were comparing.
She kept her head down, she just got on with the job, and even when she had been incredibly ill, she did exactly the same thing. And that is how you are as a member of the royal family. It isn't fair in this day and age of us being over-articulated and knowing everything about everyone. It does go against what we all perhaps are used to, but it is absolutely the way in which you should act. And I just think she's a really, really class act.
And that's when the conversation shifted from curiosity to recognition. Because people started connecting dots they'd been ignoring for years. The monetization, the timing, the constant need to turn presence into profit, attention into transaction. And once you see that pattern, it becomes impossible to unsee. Every appearance feels calculated. Every move feels loaded. And the worst part, it starts to feel predictable, like watching someone scramble to reclaim a spotlight that has already moved on. But here's the part nobody wants to say out loud: the discomfort isn't just about what's happening, it's about what it reveals. Because when someone else's moment feels like a threat instead of something to celebrate, it exposes something deeper, something instinctive, that inability to stand still while someone else shines, that reflex to interrupt, to redirect, to reclaim attention at any cost. You've seen it before, not on a global stage, but in people, in families, in friendships. That one person who just couldn't let anyone else have their moment without inserting themselves into it. And now it's playing out in front of millions. Because while Catherine was walking mountains, quietly building a story that didn't need narration, somewhere else the narrative was being forced, pushed, inserted into spaces it didn't naturally belong. And people felt it. They didn't need analysts or commentators to explain it. They felt it in the contrast, in the silence between actions, in the difference between something done and something presented. And here's where it gets even more revealing. Because when authenticity enters a space dominated by performance, it doesn't just coexist, it disrupts. It forces comparison. It raises questions nobody was asking out loud before. Why does one feel effortless while the other feels constructed? Why does one resonate without explanation while the other needs constant reinforcement? Because deep down, people recognize something ancient, something instinctive, real versus performed. And once that line becomes visible, everything changes. The week that was supposed to belong to carefully planned appearances, controlled narratives, and orchestrated returns, it slipped quietly, completely, because something more powerful took over. Not louder, not flashier, just real. And the most unsettling part, it didn't ask for permission to dominate. And this is exactly where everything starts to fracture, not loudly, not dramatically, but in those subtle, almost invisible shifts that only people paying real attention can catch. Because once the spotlight moved, and it did move, completely and unapologetically, it left behind something that no amount of strategy could fix: a loss of control over the narrative. The week that was supposed to be carefully managed, shaped, and executed suddenly wasn't theirs anymore. It belonged to something else, something they didn't plan, something they couldn't predict, and most dangerously, something they couldn't compete with. Because here's the truth nobody wants to admit: you can compete with noise, you can compete with headlines, you can even compete with controversy, but you cannot compete with authenticity when people have already chosen it. And that's exactly what happened. The public didn't just observe Catherine's moment, they aligned with it. They responded to it in a way that wasn't forced, wasn't manipulated, wasn't engineered. It was instinctive. And once that kind of response locks in, everything else feels like an interruption. And that's when the cracks started to show. Because what was supposed to be a triumphant return, a carefully positioned re-entry into the UK narrative, suddenly felt off. The energy wasn't there. The excitement didn't land the same way. The conversation had already moved on, and instead of stepping into it, they were trying to redirect it. That difference between joining a moment and trying to control it is where everything begins to fall apart. People can feel that tension. They can sense when something is flowing naturally versus when it's being pushed into place. And then came the shift in tone. Subtle at first, but unmistakable if you were watching closely. The conversation moved toward grievances, toward explanations, toward justifications that started to feel less like clarity and more like reaction. Because when something doesn't land the way it's supposed to, the instinct isn't always to step back, it's to explain harder, to push louder, to make people understand. But here's the problem. When the audience has already made up its mind, more explanation doesn't fix it, it amplifies the disconnect. And while all of this was unfolding, something else was happening quietly in the background, something far more powerful than any statement or announcement. Catherine kept doing what she had already done. No correction, no amplification, no attempt to extend the moment artificially. She didn't chase the narrative because she didn't need to. The story was already carrying itself. And that's where the contrast becomes almost impossible to ignore, because one side is reacting, adjusting, explaining, recalibrating, while the other simply continues, unchanged, unaffected, steady. That steadiness, that's what people anchor to. Not the noise, not the urgency, the consistency. And then comes the moment that defines everything, not the climb, not the headlines, not even the public reaction, but the quiet, almost invisible choices that reveal who someone is when no one's watching. The repeated encounters, the decision to stop, to engage, to return not once, but again and again. Those are not performative actions. Those are patterns of character. And patterns are what people trust. Because here's the uncomfortable reality that starts settling in once you've seen enough of this play out. You can stage a moment, but you cannot sustain authenticity across multiple moments without it being real. It breaks. It always breaks. And when it does, it doesn't just expose the act, it forces people to reevaluate everything that came before it. And that's exactly what this week did. It didn't just highlight one achievement, it reframed an entire narrative that's been building for years. Quietly, patiently, piece by piece, until suddenly it wasn't subtle anymore. It was undeniable. The difference between doing and presenting, between being and performing, between service and visibility. And once that distinction becomes clear, everything that follows gets filtered through it. Every appearance, every statement, every move. Because now people aren't just watching, they're measuring. And that's where the real tension begins, not in what's already happened, but in what comes next. Because once the audience starts seeing patterns, once they start recognizing intent behind timing, behind messaging, behind every carefully placed moment, it becomes harder to regain what's been lost. Trust doesn't return because you ask for it. It returns when behavior aligns with it, consistently, quietly, over time. But here's the question that lingers, the one that doesn't go away, the one that sits just beneath everything you've just seen. What happens when one side has already proven it doesn't need the spotlight and the other side can't function without it? Because if this week showed anything, it's this. The balance has shifted, not temporarily, not slightly, fundamentally. And once something shifts at that level, it doesn't just snap back.